Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, 3:30, we talked to Nathan Leamer from the Digital First Project about the United States House deciding to take the first steps to force a sale of that Chinese Communist Party-controlled TikTok today. Nathan will have the latest there for us. Joe Simonson joins us at 4:30 from the Washington Free Beacon. You see that Joe Biden transcript with Robert Hur? Some of the most bizarre and unintentionally hilarious moments you've ever encountered in politics. Joe Simonson will survey all of them for us. And then Tom Dupree is here. He's an attorney. We'll talk to him about a bunch of big legal news today, including several charges being dropped against Donald Trump today in Fulton County, Georgia. More on that ahead. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Let me set the scene for some of the big news today, especially this TikTok thing. You see, NBC News is reporting on a survey from Gallup this morning. Headline, nearly 30% of Gen Z women identify as LGBTQ. Nearly 30%. Those are women ages 18 to 26. From the ages, they're all voters, 18 to 26 years old. 30% of Gen Z women identify as LGBTQ. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, which letter do they identify as? Well, I'm glad you asked. It turns out almost all of them claim to be bisexual. Bisexual. That's probably the easiest one to pick out of the letters because, you don't really have to act on all your impulses there, I guess. So LGBTQ women say, 30% in the very young age group. The percentage of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer adults in the U.S. continues to increase, reaching an all-time high of 7.6% in 2023, according to a new Gallup report. Broken down by gender, the survey of 12,000 people 18 and older across the country found that women were nearly twice as likely as men to identify as LGBTQ. Almost 30% of Gen Z women identify as LGBTQ+, most as bisexual, said Jeffrey Jones, a senior editor at Gallup. That's where a lot of the growth seems to be happening. This is the first year Gallup has laid out its annual LGBTQ identification report in a way that breaks down each generation by gender. Looking at all generations, 8.5% of women and 4.7% of men identified as LGBTQ, the survey found. Yeah, okay, so across all generations, just 8.5% of women. The Gen Z survey, that would be the 18 to 26 set, 30% of the ladies say they're LGBTQ. Now, in the past, when we've detected this particular piece of data, what it normally means is literally nothing. What it means is that you have women who are doing that, saying that because it's fashionable. They're adopting these identities because they realize that this is what our culture rewards now, that rather than achievement, your identity is the thing that opens doors for you and helps you to connect with the broader culture. So these women are claiming to be bisexual. But then when you do deeper dives into, okay, what are you really? Have you engaged in any behavior that would suggest that you're bisexual? The answer is no. The answer is no. It's a front. It's just a declaration that any number of women are making. But why does this happen? Why do we get to the point where you get this ridiculous sort of narcissism coming out and people thinking that identity is more important than anything else? And the answer to that lies in no small part with TikTok. TikTok is the Chinese Communist Party-controlled app that has dominated among America's youngest people, and particularly these young adults. And it is the single most popular app, and it's the vehicle through which so many of them find out all the ways to think about the world and certainly the news that they consume. And it has obviously caught some attention in Washington that the Chinese Communist Party is controlling the news consumption of young Americans and obviously distorting everything. And members of both parties are approaching this for very different reasons as an issue. So let me start with Republicans. To the extent that you have Republicans today on Capitol Hill who are going after TikTok, it's because they're concerned about the Chinese Communist Party threat to our country, both in terms of surveillance, the ability to gather intel, the ability to invade the cell phones of Americans everywhere, hundreds of millions of Americans everywhere to use their location data to track all of their movements, all of their web consumption, all of their contacts, all of that. They're able to create an immense net of intel that they can gather in order to power the Chinese Communist Party's surveillance of America. A. B, and perhaps, these are in no particular order, perhaps even more important, is the influence operation China can run on the United States. Ever wonder yourself, why are kids so crazy now? Like, remember after October 7th? Do you remember all of the pro-Hamas content all over TikTok? Remember all of this? It was insanity what was happening. It was rooting on the terror attack in Israel. Nuts. Last year, there was also the case of a bunch of kids being served content praising Osama bin Laden's attacks on the United States, praising Al-Qaeda for attacking the United States, suggesting that the United States deserved September 11th. Do you remember this cycle? And so all these kids are seeing this content. It's pumped to them by an algorithm that's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, meant to undermine the United States of America. Now, throughout history, the United States has worked to stop these types of threats, in particular when it came to the Soviets, right? We wouldn't, if you go back in time, kind of disconnect from the internet era, would we allow the Soviets to operate a major media organization, a major news delivery organization right here in the middle of the United States of America? No, we wouldn't. No, we were at war with the Soviets. They're a chief adversary looking to undermine us. China's doing the same thing here. And so it's an immense threat. Meanwhile, the left views this differently. The left views TikTok as a problem because they can't control all of the conversations that are taking place on TikTok. Now, you may think from the outside, especially if you're not on TikTok, that all TikTok is doing is serving up, say, pro-Biden propaganda all the time. But it's not quite as easy as that. TikTok is serving up divisive propaganda a lot. But they're also sometimes serving up things that the Biden administration just doesn't like people talking about. For instance, the Biden administration is upset that young people are talking about how terrible our economy is right now. They're upset about that, and that conversation is, in part, happening on TikTok. In fact, today, there's a piece in the New York Times this morning exploring all of this, written by a guy called David Leonard, and the headline is, "Should China Own TikTok?" Inside the bipartisan effort to end Chinese ownership of the app. And he writes this: to understand why the House of Representatives will vote today, which they did earlier, on this bipartisan bill to force TikTok's Chinese parent company to sell the platform, it helps to look at a few recent news stories. Get ready. Here's bullet number 1. Despite low unemployment and falling inflation, TikTok is full of viral videos bemoaning the U.S. economy. One popular group of posts uses the term silent depression. The posts falsely suggest that the country's in worse shape today than it was in 1930. He goes on to say that 2 of his colleagues have reported on these posts late last year. All right, so pause on that for a moment. So the Biden administration has an incentive here. They're losing young people. Have you seen the surveys? Young people are more often siding with Trump than Biden in a bunch of recent polls, a bunch of them. And the Biden White House keeps insisting the economy is fantastic. Americans are just too ill-informed and too stupid to know it. You're too dumb to realize how good the economy is. And never mind the fact that you are actually, on average, poorer than you were 4 years ago. That's true. Never mind the fact that despite those unemployment numbers is looking like they're record lows, that what that actually means is that Americans are losing full-time jobs at an unbelievable pace, and many Americans are taking multiple part-time jobs, and those jobs are being double counted in order to give you a number that's actually a lie about the health of the American economy. That's true, too. Also, native-born Americans are not even back to the pre-pandemic levels of employment. They have lost employment from where they were pre-pandemic. All of the new jobs, to the extent that there are any of those, created in this economy since that time, since Joe Biden became president, foreign-born workers. Never mind all of that. So the Biden White House doesn't want you dwelling on any of those actual facts. Instead, they want you to believe the economy is great and that Joe Biden deserves credit. That's what they want you to believe. So there's an anger that on TikTok, there's a dominant theme that actually the economy is terrible. It's not doing well, and that people are experiencing a, quote, silent depression. All right, bullet point number 2. After Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack, TikTok flooded users with videos expressing extreme positions from both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, says the New York Times. Tilted towards the Palestinian side, okay, this is an understatement. The New York Times is dramatically understating what happened here. There was enthusiasm for the terror attack on Israel rocketing across TikTok. Many stoked fear, the Wall Street Journal would report at the time. In November, videos praising an old Osama bin Laden letter also went viral. Okay. So there you can find within those two things, the economy and what happened on October 7th and the way TikTok accelerated the pro-terror sympathies. That led to a drop in Biden's approval rating among young voters. They didn't like him as a result. They were siding with Hamas, thanks to the TikTok pressure they were getting. Oh, everybody sides with Hamas. Oh, Israel's committing a genocide. All of this stuff. This is being pushed by TikTok. They start holding Biden accountable for speaking up in any way on behalf of Israel on the outset of that. And Biden's numbers go down. So they have a political incentive here. I never for a second think to myself, oh, Biden really wants to stick it to the CCP. Please. His family has been enriched by the Chinese. That it's ridiculous to think that he's taking a principled position against the CCP here. Some Republicans are. Some Republicans are taking that position today. And that led to the vote. There was a vote today to pass this bill that would force a divestiture of TikTok. That is, TikTok would not be allowed to be controlled by the Chinese government anymore. All of its component parts would have to be sold off elsewhere. Here's the reading of the vote tally today.
On this vote, the yeas are 352, the nays are 65. One present, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed. And without the objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
So off it goes. And now the United States Senate is going to consider this thing. And apparently they're ready to drag their butts on this because senators don't quite know what to do with it yet. But we'll see. Biden has indicated that he will sign this bill into law. So what does it contain? What's actually in the law? We've been talking about it all week. I've been asking a lot of questions of the experts, and I plan to do that with Nathan Leamer coming up here in just a few minutes. But I read the bill. I read it in detail. It's not that long, actually. You can read it. I think it's about 8 pages or so. You can read it in detail. And we've been assured over and over by a number of people who support the legislation that it is narrowly tailored, that any idea that the Biden administration will be given the power to, say, ban Twitter or Facebook is just not true. They won't be able to ban those social media companies. And that instead it very narrowly targets foreign adversary countries that include China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, and asserts all sorts of specifics for what it means for them to control the app. And reading through the bill, I'm inclined to believe that that's the case here. Now, will the government abuse its power? Yeah, well, it does all the time. It does all the time. Under many other pretexts, including breaking current laws we already have. Biden does that on a routine basis. There's only so many constraints, apparently, we can impose on him because nobody's putting consequences on the guy. But as far as the actual wording of the law, it does seem narrow and targeted to TikTok. In fact, it talks about TikTok and ByteDance, its parent company based in China, throughout the bill. But the section of the bill that I'm deeply concerned about is the what happens next portion. The qualified divestiture. So if this bill succeeds, if it becomes a law, China is no longer going to be able to own TikTok if they want that platform to operate in the United States. So they will have to sell it off. They'll have to sell it off. But to whom will they sell it? That is a key point here, and the one I want to explore with you next. First, okay, so this TikTok bill, again, passed the House today. And the section I'm the most concerned about is not this idea that the government's going to come along and ban Twitter. I don't think the legislation really allows for that. Now, of course, the president abuses all sorts of powers, like I said. But here's where I'm really concerned. There's a section of the bill, starts on page 11, and it refers to a qualified divestiture. Because remember, this bill is not a simple ban of TikTok. It compels TikTok to be sold, or else China will face a ban if they fail to sell it. Now, that would be the best outcome. If China's just like, oh, we don't want to sell it. We just want to keep, wielding this power elsewhere on the planet, except the United States. Perfect. I'm all for it. Great. Just do that. But stay out of our country. But in this legislation, it refers to a qualified divestiture. And it says that it would be up to the president to determine through an interagency process, and it would result in the relevant foreign adversary-controlled application no longer being controlled by the foreign adversary. So in other words, the president would get to decide whether a would-be buyer is allowed to own the platform, right? And to say they are not in any way controlled by the foreign adversary, therefore they are an eligible buyer for this. They can do this. They also say the transaction will have to satisfy this, that the president determines through an interagency process it precludes the establishment or maintenance of any operational relationship between the United States operations of the relevant foreign adversary controlled application and any formerly affiliated entities that are controlled by a foreign adversary, including any cooperation with respect to the operation of a content recommendation algorithm or an agreement with respect to data sharing. In other words, you have to completely break free of the old ownership. In this case, the Chinese Communist Party, the old regime, which is fine. That's what you want. That is what you want. But this provides Biden, in this case, and any other president for that matter, all the discretion in the world to decide who gets to own that platform. So what did I start the conversation with? We talked about Biden and company are furious about the types of things that people are seeing on TikTok because they're hurting his approval. They're upset about that. If Biden is given the power to pick who owns TikTok before the election, then you're talking about hundreds of millions of Americans being served a pipeline of content that is Biden world approved. And that's what I'm on guard for today. I'm looking at this legislation going, okay, fine, you force a sale of TikTok, but who's actually going to own it? Who's going to own it? And the left has demonstrated an insatiable appetite for censorship through the social media companies. That's just true. We've seen it over and over. Using the government to then go after social media companies to pressure them to censor content. If this thing's going to actually appear before the Senate, damn, I think it needs to be amended. It needs to be changed in a way that protects us and doesn't let Biden have access to one of the biggest social media platforms on the planet in order to push his propaganda rather than the Chinese parties. More ahead on this. We're going to talk to Nathan Leamer about this very thing. That's ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Joe Simonson, that is, joins us from the Washington Free Beacon at 4:30. We talk about Joe Biden's most bizarre moments from his conversations with Robert Hur. And then Tom Dupree, the attorney, joins us, former principal deputy assistant attorney general. Talk about some big news out of Fulton County, Georgia. The judge down there throwing out a number of charges against Donald Trump and his co-defendants. It's a big news day yet again. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. This morning, the United States House of Representatives moving along with passing a piece of legislation designed to force the divestiture of TikTok and take it out of the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. There were 352 yays and 65 nays and one present vote. For more on this bill and what it means for our country, I want to bring in Nathan Leamer now. He's the executive director of the Digital First Project, and he joins us on the phone. Hello, Nathan.
Hi, first time, long time.
Great to have you here today, sir. So I understand that you are pleased with this legislation. Give us a sense of why.
Yeah, this is a really important step to secure Americans' data online and protecting it from our threats overseas, particularly the CCP, as they are owning and operating ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, and has used that app to not just pollute propaganda, but then also at the same time engage in data warfare, where they're using it as espionage on the 170 million American users.
Yeah, big time. And there's no question. I'm right there with you. TikTok is an immense threat to the country, and I think deserved to be banned a long time ago, and yet hasn't been. This decision to force a divestiture, is this the optimal way to go, to have some other company purchase this social media platform, or wouldn't it be better just to ban it outright?
Great question. So President Trump tried using an executive order to force the divestiture, and that didn't go all the way. And then there was a couple other pieces of legislation to look at this issue as well. And in Congress, there's always many ways to skin a cat. And The bill brought forth today is actually, I think, the best of both worlds. It's narrowly targeted at TikTok and similar apps that are owned by foreign adversaries, but then also at the same time, it allows Congress to be involved in the conversation.
So when you say it's narrowly targeted, it means that there are like actual statutory thresholds that that an app like TikTok would have to cross before it was considered ban-worthy, and that it doesn't afford Biden, for instance, the kind of flexibility to ban Twitter, right?
That's exactly correct. It affects foreign adversarially owned entities, specifically like TikTok. It would not affect companies that have connections to other countries that are not foreign adversaries. The four foreign adversary nations are Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia. And so it doesn't affect those entities. It doesn't affect any entity not owned by those four countries.
So I brought this up yesterday when he first expressed it, but Congressman Thomas Massie, who I like on a lot of issues, he's been out saying that actually this is a Trojan horse. This would permit the government to banish other platforms here in the United States. By your assessment, he's wrong about that. And I should also note that Thomas Massie is also the recipient of a lot of donor money from a guy called Jeff Yass, who owns a massive stake of TikTok here in the United States of America. So he has a public conflict of interest on this particular question. And actually, a lot of other Republicans do as well. How do you address these concerns?
I think the donation question is always a fair one, but I will say that I think Representative Massie is incredibly principled and has always raised concerns about certain congressional actions. So this is not uncommon. But I think his point misses the mark when it comes to actual legislation in the text. The text is specifically about TikTok and entities owned by foreign adversaries, and would not affect other companies such as X or Spotify or other entities that you may use on your phone.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about the divestiture portion. And this is the area that I'm the most concerned about because there's inside the bill, it refers to a qualified divestiture, which is, in other words, what kind of company or person could actually purchase this thing. And the discretion for that is left to, according to the bill, the President of the United States through an interagency process. Now, when I see that, all sorts of red flags go off. And the reason for that is because we know that the government is very corrupt about unfortunately, is often very corrupt about the way it approves things that it gets involved with, whether those are mergers or environmental clearances. Typically, it's the people with the best connections to politicians who get the best access to the best outcomes. And in this case, how comfortable are you in thinking that whoever ends up owning TikTok is not just going to be a handmaiden to Joe Biden and his presidential campaign?
It's a fair concern. I think everyone should be asking it in the Biden administration. But, I think we can actually look at the FCC and the way they've handled whether questions around divestitures around telecom entities such as Huawei or ZTE or China Telecom in efforts to actually reduce China's influence on our wireless and wireline infrastructure. And so I think there's a template for success that would allow American innovators to step in and honestly, innovators from across the globe who are not connected to these foreign adversaries to step in and make a more robust internet ecosystem.
But it is correct to say that it would be the president, the executive branch, that will give the all clear on who gets to buy TikTok.
There were also agencies under congressional oversight that would also have a pretty strong say in that conversation.
But those are executive branch agencies, right?
Man, we're getting into tricky constitutional questions, but for example, the FCC is an agency that is directly responding to the Congress. So that's just an example.
Okay. So would the FCC, to your knowledge, be involved in the TikTok purchase?
I'm unaware of the FCC specific on this one.
Okay. So this is an area where I'm concerned. And so as you view the bill today, obviously you're in favor of it, no question. You talked about that. But do you think it's perfect as written, or is there anything that can be changed about it that would improve it?
I think it is incumbent on those who are opposed to really kind of come to the table and actually look at the specific language instead of taking innuendo and actually look at the actual specific text and come up with some strong solutions that might mitigate some of their concerns. But as currently written, I've not been concerned with those issues.
Okay, let me ask you about another portion of the bill then. There's a judicial review. That is, if you have a challenge to this act in any way, that the challenges, they say, in the bill can only be filed in the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Is that a pro forma thing that's being in this legislation, or is that a specific decision to send any challenges to this legislation to that court in particular?
I believe it's pro forma.
Okay, so it's not just an effort to send it in front of one of the most left-wing courts in the country?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, all right. Well, these seem like critical questions. Now, what are the chances it makes its way through the Senate? The Senate today seems to be ready to drag its feet on this.
Well, I expect nothing short of the world's greatest deliberative body to take their time in discerning the issue. But I was encouraged to see Senator Mark Warner and Senator Marco Rubio come together and talk about how they endorse this legislation and look to move forward with it.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see if that actually happens. In the meantime, thank you very much, Nathan Leamer with the Digital First Project. Good to have you today, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right. That's Nathan Leamer. Let's see here. Let me bring in Ryan in Woodbridge, line 3. Ryan, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, welcome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Good, Ryan. Go for it.
Well, I mean, TikTok bills, Nancy Pelosi, let's pass it, see what's in it.
Yeah.
I don't trust the politicians, left or right, to be upfront and honest with what the small fine print is going to say in any of these bills until they come to the public with one bill, one vote, with a easily digested bill that someone could read in a couple hours or one day, or at least open it to the public before they start ramming it down our throats.
Yes.
I don't trust them.
Well, you have the right instincts, Ryan. I have the same thought, which is like anytime you see all of Washington start to get there, or at least most of Washington start to get together and tell us that they want pass a piece of legislation that's designed to take care of a national security threat, that all my alarm bells start going off. Like, well, wait a second. We've seen this happen a million times. Everything from the Patriot Act to FISA, and then all of a sudden, all of these threats to liberty are actually aimed directly at Americans rather than at foreign targets. So you're totally right to be suspicious and cynical about this. And that's how I'm approaching this. I recognize that TikTok is an immense threat and should be handled. We've got to figure that out. But at the same time, I'm looking through the language. And by the way, the bill is not that long. You can read it in an afternoon, Ryan. Not even an afternoon. You can read it in like 15 minutes. But you read through this thing and you start saying, okay, where's there a problem here? And I'm saying this as a non-lawyer. This is why we have these experts on. I want to talk to these guys. Well, hold on a second. So who's going to own this thing after it's sold? And wait, so Biden?
And who owns the stocks? Who owns the stocks or the companies that are going to be taking this over? Follow the money.
Yeah, always. Smart points. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the call today. Let me see. I've got Hoke calling in from Round Hill, line 1. Hoke, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. So, look, there's already a committee that is very similar to this one. It's called the CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Think Uranium One, Dubai Ports World.
Right.
And it is very, very politicized. The president can either accept or decline the recommendation of the committee. And who really believes President, God help us, Harris, would believe or would take the recommendation of a committee that is doing something that's not in her interest?
Sure. Yeah, that's a critical point. And so they say here that the new buyer would be considered through a similar interagency process where you get all the different agencies contributing their views on this. And then the president gets to make a decision, whoever that person is, Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. And so from where I'm sitting, I'm saying, well, wait a second. They're just going to pick somebody who's going to tailor an algorithm and deliver to the youngest voters all across the country whatever propaganda they desire. I mean, this seems very ripe for that kind of corruption.
Study up on CFIUS, and you will see how it seems to be the exact same process, and I don't see it being done for the best interest of the American people.
Right. Well, as you mentioned, this is exactly where Hillary Clinton got into all of that scandal with Uranium One through the CFIUS process. You're totally right about that.
Correct.
Hoke, thank you
Yep.
very much for the call. So there you go. You did have a number of Republicans today who voted against this thing. Rand Paul, let's see, Rand Paul he's not in the House, he's in the Senate, but he was on Fox Business this morning. He had this to say.
If you don't like what they do on TikTok or Facebook or Google, don't use them. All of these internet companies take up information. And so I think if you destroy TikTok, you may well make its competitors bigger. Some of the people up here lobbying to destroy TikTok are actually their competitors. So this isn't just about...
I believe that, and we've heard a lot of that. Of course, Facebook has every interest in the world to advance this. It doesn't mean that the outcome would be wrong, though. Their motivations may be different than mine, but...
Oh, we're against communism. If you don't like TikTok, don't use them. But realize that in China, they banned TikTok. So we're going to somehow defeat the Chinese model by becoming like the Chinese.
Well, they've also banned every American platform, too, just to be clear. So just as a reciprocity measure, we could ban TikTok.
And banning TikTok here. Look, people should use them or not use them. That's what happens in capitalism.
I love Rand Paul. That is a naive position. I'm telling you, this whole idea that, if you don't like it, don't use it. That's not the issue. Right now, you have a massive distorting effect. The town square is being corrupted by the Chinese Communist Party. One individual who likes Rand Paul sitting there going, man, that's all right. I'll never use TikTok. That's not the issue. It's the same thing with these big social media companies, Facebook and Twitter, Google in particular. How many times have I talked about this? Google, as a search engine, controls 90% of the world's search. That is 90% of the people who are using the internet in order to establish what is true and what is false are using Google as the way to do it. Is that not immense power? Is that not corrupting power? Does that not distort civil society? If they fail to tell you what's actually going on in the world, how are you to make wise decisions as a voter in that obligation you have, in that right you have, in that constitutional duty you have? How are you to do that? And how is society to do that? It's the same reason we debate the public schools so much, is because what kind of kids are they churning out? What kind of society are we left with? Even people who don't have children have an inherent interest in what kind of citizens our government-run schools are pumping out. And the same is true with these big tech companies, the distorting effect they have. Did we see that play out in 2020? You bet your tail we did. We definitely saw that. Immense power. And here you have the Chinese Communist Party running the single biggest platform for the youth vote in the entire United States of America. You think that doesn't damage your country? Hey, I've got to make sure not to miss this announcement. While tickets are still available, literally, you may have heard the advertising today here on WMAL. The Free Speech Forum is back, and the tickets go lightning fast for this thing. If you haven't been to a Free Speech Forum before, it's when so many of the hosts of WMAL, we all get together on one stage at the Birchmere in Alexandria. It'll be myself, Larry O'Connor, Chris Plant, Julie Gunlock, Patrice Onwuka, and the great one himself, Mark Levin. We're all going to be on stage together, answering your questions, talking to each other, talking about behind-the-scenes stories, giving you predictions of what's to come in the year ahead, all live and in person right there on stage at the Birchmere in Alexandria. That takes place one night only. That's on Sunday, June 2nd. If you're interested in getting the details and, more importantly, the tickets to this, make sure to go to WMAL.com/Free Speech Forum, WMAL.com/Free Speech Forum, or I think you can get them. I know you can get them through Ticketmaster. It's such a blast. We have such a good time, and it's funny. Every year when we do this, we try to do it every year as much as we can. We had a couple months ago, we missed a chance to. We couldn't figure out a date where we would all be able to get together and something that the Birchmere had available. But now we have one again, Sunday, June 2nd. But it's amusing. It's always a countdown timer to how quickly Larry O'Connor curses. We're not on radio. We're in person. So will there be a curse word out of Larry O'Connor's mouth? It's possible. In fact, it's likely. I would place your bets now. It's amazing. And so you have that to look forward to. But again, Sunday, June 2nd, get your tickets at WMAL.com/Free Speech Forum. Let me go to WMAL regular Phil in Fredericksburg, who's calling in now, line 3. Phil, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, look, I absolutely don't trust Congress on this. The Communist Chinese own the president. They own half of the people in Congress. And this is be a perfect way for the Communist Chinese to get a foothold into the White House where they could ban conservative internet sites on YouTube and all over the internet. And they could also come after WMAL as a conservative site and say it's terrorist because, as you know, everybody who defended their sons and daughters at the school board meetings was terrorists. So I don't trust Congress about this. They want to ban TikTok
Amen.
outright as an arm of the Communist Chinese government. but leave our freedoms alone. I don't trust Congress on this at all.
You've got the right instincts, Phil, as always. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's, you get very cynical about all this because they fail us so frequently. They exploit their power too frequently. And yes, the appropriate action here is ban the Chinese Communist Party's surveillance and influence machine in the United States. That's the appropriate way to handle this. Coming up, we're going to be joined by Joe Simonson. We've got to talk about that conversation between Joe Biden and Robert Hur when Biden started making car noises during the interview. They literally didn't even know how to write it down. They just wrote car noises. I assume vroom, vroom. We'll get to it.